Hello and welcome to Database Management Systems. I'm Jovita Christie, and this is the last structured query language video where I'm going to explain views and data control language. So let's begin with views. Views are created from the existing tables within your database. And what you do is, in order to create a view, you simply write a select query. And then that query gets stored as a view inside your database. And then you can use it as a normal table. You can apply different select queries to your view. So it just works like a normal relation, a normal table. And the reason why we create views is because in a database, sometimes the administrator does not want a person to have the entire access. So he doesn't want a person to see the entire table. So what he will do is he will store the same table using a view where he will select only certain columns or rows of the table, and then he will provide that to the person to view. So that person cannot see the entire table, but he can only see the part of the table that the administrator wants him or her to see. So this is all about authority and authorization and different access given to different people. So that's what views are. And I'm going to show you with an example how to create a view. So I'm going to go to my SQL Oracle Plus command line, and I'm going to show you how to create a view and how to access it. Now, to show you views, I have already created one table inside my command line, and I'm going to show you that table first. So this is my table. It contains 10 rows, and so there are 10 people stored, names, IDs, and their hobbies and occupations. So you can also go ahead and create this table if you like, and otherwise you can just try to understand what I'm doing in this video. So now I'm going to go and create a view. So to create a view, I just have to write down create view, and then I'll write down the name of the view, so whatever name I want to give it, and afterwards I need to mention the query through which I want to create the view. So it will be a select query, a simple select query, and I'm going to show it to you right now how to do it. So you need to write down create view and specify its name. You can name it anything you like. Usually you would name it related to the table given. So I'm naming it person underscore occupation because I only want to show occupations of the people in my table. I don't want to show all the data. So then you use the as keyword and specify your select query. So in the select query, I'm writing select name, comma, occupation from persons, and it says view create. So wherever you have written this select query, right there. So this query can be anything. So whatever select queries you have practiced in all the videos that I've posted so far, those select queries can be mentioned here in place of this simple query where I have simply selected two columns and just displayed those. But for now, this is a simple query, and you can go ahead and try with other queries also. For now, this is a query where I'm simply taking the names of the people and their occupations and storing them as a view called person underscore occupation. Now, person underscore occupation is nothing but another table, but it is just stored as this query that I've written. So it is created using this table, but it is stored only as a query that I've written here. So every time you try to access this view, you have to write down the same queries that you would write down to access any normal table in SQL. The only thing is when you try to access this view, you would be writing a query like select star from person underscore occupation. But in the background, your database will run this query that you have right here, stored as a view in the database. So let's go ahead and check the query. So you can see right here that I have done select star from person underscore occupation. And when I do this, I get the same two columns which I got from the actual person relation. So the person relation is whatever columns that person relation has, the same columns are stored here in person underscore occupation. But when I do select star from that, then I get only two columns because this view contains only these two columns. So a person who is actually accessing a view and who has not created the view would not actually know that this is not a table. This just acts this acts like a table in every way, and you can experiment with different ways to create a view. You can use different select queries to create this type of a view. Now the question that arises is, are views updatable? Because I said that views just act like tables and you can select any type of data and display it. So all types of select queries would work. But what about update query? Could you update a view? Now a view is not stored inside your system like I said before. Only the query that you wrote to create the view is stored. So that means, can you update a view or not? And if you update a view, then what happens to the original table? Is there a change in that too? And I'm going to show you that with an example in my SQL plus command line. But before that, I'll tell you certain conditions if through which a view can be updatable. So there are four conditions. If those are satisfied, then a view is updatable. The first condition is the from clause should have only one table. So that means you cannot use a join, you cannot use a Cartesian product, union, or any operation inside the from clause when you are writing a select query for the view. The second condition is that the select clause should contain only names of columns. So when you are creating a view and writing the select query, so at that time, your select query should contain only names of the columns and not aggregate functions or any types of functions or any calculations like subtracting one column from another column or adding 5% salary. All these things should not be there while creating the view. The third condition is all the not null attributes of the table must be included in the view. So for example, if your table has a primary key, then that primary key should be included within the view. If it's not included, then obviously you cannot update the view. There is no group by or having clause in the view. So while creating the view, if the select query is using a group by or having keyword, then that view is not updatable. So these keywords should not be there if you want the view to be updatable. Let's try to update the view that we created earlier. That was the person underscore occupation. So we are going to try and insert some data into it. So let's see if that is possible or not. So I'm writing an insert query, insert into person underscore occupation, which I created earlier. And I'm going to add, I have access to two columns, name and occupation. So I'm going to add one more person. I'm going to add my name. And I'm going to add an occupation, professor, within it. And I forgot to add values, yes. So when I do that, it says one row created. And now let's see where exactly that one row got stored. So I'm doing select star from person underscore occupation. And you can see that even though it's a view, the values are present. So that extra row is present. Now let's see the persons table. So when I do select star from persons, you can see that the values are present here also. But the only difference is that the ID and the hobby columns are null. And you can guess the reason why, because the person underscore occupation view only contained name and occupation. So you cannot add ID and hobby. But whenever you make change to a view, that change gets applied to the original table also. So this is how you can update a view. And this view was created using a very simple query, and it followed all the conditions to make it updatable. That's why it was updatable. But not all views are updatable. And I told you the conditions, and if you violate one of those conditions, so maybe you can try creating a view using a select query that uses a join operation. And if you do that, then that view won't be updatable. You can try inserting data into it and you'll understand that it's not updatable. Then you can try, my persons table did not have ID as a primary key. I did not create a primary key, but you can try to make ID a primary key and then try to update the view. This time you won't be able to update it, because when you try to insert something into person underscore occupations, that also gets inserted in persons. And in persons, if the ID is null, then it would create a problem for you. It would give you an error because the primary key cannot be null. So these are some of the conditions, and you can try and experiment with those conditions and try to make a view updatable or non-updatable with those conditions. Now we are going to see data control language. So in the previous videos, I've explained data definition language used to create tables and schemas. And then there's the data manipulation language, which has update and delete queries, and also the select query, which is used to view and edit the data present. And now we are going to see the data control language. Data control language is used to provide access and authority to different users. So this is usually used by a database administrator. And the database administrator would want to decide what kinds of tables should be accessible to what kinds of users. And also at the same time, the database administrator would be able to decide whether a user is having access to the database at all. So for such cases, we can have the data control language. This allows you to create your own users. Within SQL Plus in Oracle, you already have several users available to you. One of them is the system user, which is what most of us use while practicing these queries. But other than that, you can create your own users also. And if you want to do it, then I would suggest that you log in using the system username, and then you try to create all these users over here. So once again, this is my SQL command line. And first of all, we are going to try to create a user. So let's go ahead and create a user. You can create a user by writing this query, create user, and then write down the name, that is the username for that user. At this point, if you are using this new version of Oracle SQL Plus, then it allows you to create new users only if you begin the username by writing C ##. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write down C ##, and then I'll write down my name to create a new user. And then you need to write identified by, and here you'll mention the password. So I'm creating a new user, but I also need to give a password to that user. So the username is C ## Javita, and the password I'm writing Christy. So this is the password. And then you need to do semicolon. And it gives me this error, that is, it conflicts with another user or role name. And the reason why I get this error is because previously I've already created a user with this name. So in order to remove this error, I need to go and write down the drop user query. So before you create the user, I'm going to show you how to drop a user. So in order to drop a user, you have to write down drop user and then write down the name of the user. It's as simple as that. And that way you can remove the user from your system. It takes a little while, but it's going to tell you user dropped. And after this, you can run the create user query and it says user created. So this is the new user that I've created. And now I'm going to try to access this. So to access, you have to write down connect. And then it asks for the username. So I'm going to write this new user that I created. So that was C ## and then my name. And once I've done that, I'll enter the password, which was Christy, which I wrote earlier. So now you can see it gives me an error that it does not have, it lacks a create session privilege or logon denied. The reason for this error is once the database administrator creates a user, he also has to make sure that the user has a privilege, a permission to actually log in. So there are two things. You have to create the user and give the permission to the user to also log in. That's not the only permission you can give to a user. You can give other types of permissions like accessing a particular table or permission to modify some table. All these permissions are available for the user. So we are going to now see how to grant certain permissions to the user and also how to take away some permissions from the user. So in order to give access to certain things or remove access from certain things, you have to again log in from your system username. And once you've done that, then you can write your grant query. So now you're going to say grant and you will specify what you want to grant. So in this case, I want to grant the create session permission, which was lacking earlier. So you are going to write down at this point that you want to grant the create session permission. So you just write down create session and then you can write down to and write the name of your user. So it is C ## Javita and it says grant succeeded. And now when I try to connect to my system using that username and password, the password is Christy and it's not visible, but it gets typed. So you can see that now it is successfully connected. And the reason for this is that I gave the create session right to this particular user from the administration login. So this is how you can create a user and grant some permissions to the user to do some work. Now I'm going to try and access some table. So when I do select star from persons, it gives me an error. And the reason for this error is that I haven't been given access to this table. The persons table is created by the administrator and the administrator has not given me access to this table. And that is why I cannot access the table from this username. So if I want this particular user to access this, I have to give the right to access it. So I also created a person's occupation table. So let's see, that was a view. Now if I try to access that, again it says table or view does not exist because this user has not been given access to these tables and to these views. So again, now I'm going to connect with the system using the system username. So you can see here, again, I'm typing system and my password. And when it says connected, now I'm going to try to grant that access. So I'm going to do grant, and in order to grant an access to view a table, I need to specify that particular command. So I'm allowing the user to select and insert on the person occupation table. So the person occupation table is not actually a table, a view, but I'm going to allow the person to access that. And then when it says grant succeeded, at that time again I'm going to connect to that to the system using the new username and password which I created. And now still, if you try to do select star from person underscore occupation, you will still get an error here. It says table of view does not exist because this has been created by the system. So in order to access it, you need to write down the name of the user who created that table and then access it. So far, you never had to do it because you created all your tables within the system username and password. So you simply have to write name of the table. But when you create another user, and from that user's login, if you want to access tables created by the system, then you need to use a slightly different mechanism. Now, in order to access this, you need to write down, instead of just person underscore occupation, you have to mention system.person underscore occupation. So select star from system. System is the name of the user who created it. And then you can see that I can access this entire table from my login. Now let me try to access the persons table, which I created. It says it does not exist. The reason is I have not given access to this table to this particular user. So this user can only access person occupation, but not persons table. If I try to insert data, I can write down again, insert into system, insert into system.persons values, and then I'm entering certain values inside. And it says table of view does not exist because there is no access to the persons table. I only have access to the person underscore occupations table. So you can change that and write person underscore occupation. And now you can see when you hit enter, it says one row created. And then you can go ahead and view that row by doing select star from person underscore occupation. And again, I forgot to write system, so you need to specify system dot, and you can see that that row is now visible, which I inserted earlier. I have no way of checking the persons table right now from this login, but you can go to system, you can connect to the system and your password again, and at that time you can try to do select star from persons, and you will see that this particular row which was added by the user Jovita is also added in your original table. So that's how this thing works. That's how creating a user and granting permissions works. Now the user can only do select and insert, but I cannot do anything else within this. I can only do select and I can only insert into this because those are the permissions given. Now you can see that first I'm going to go ahead and check within the system. So I'm checking the persons table. Select star from persons. And you can see that the extra row that was added earlier from the user which was created, new user which was created, that row is also added over here. And now let's see if we can delete something from the person's occupation table. So I'm writing delete from system.person_occupation, where, and I'm specifying some occupation, where occupation equal to professor. So I'm trying to delete the row that I inserted, and it gives me the error that says insufficient privileges. And when can you get this error? You can get this error when you do not have the permission to perform that query. So if you remember, then I have given the permission to only select and insert into this view to this particular user. I'm not given the permission to delete. And that's why it says insufficient privileges. So this user cannot delete anything. But if you want, you can grant this permission again in the same way like we granted insert and select permissions. So you can go ahead and just experiment with that and explore it further. Now, in the last part of this video, I'm going to show you how to take away a permission from the user. So I'm going to again log into my system username, and which is my administrative account, and from there I'm going to take away the permission to insert from this new user that I have created. So let's first type connect. And then we can write username as system and password is whatever you inserted as a password earlier. So once that is connected, then I can perform this query. The query is revoke, and then you write down what you want to revoke. So I want to revoke the insert permission. So I'll write revoke insert on which table. So I want it revoked on person_occupation, and from which user. So from C ## Javita. And then it says revoke succeeded. So let me check it now. So I'm going to connect again with C ## Javita and enter my password, which is Christy, and then it's connected. And now I'm going to try to insert again. So this time when I do insert into system.person_occupation values, and then I'm inserting certain values inside. So I'm inserting JVC and engineer, and it says insufficient privileges. And the reason why it gives me this error is because I removed the permission from this user to insert anything into this table. So now this is the error I get, but I still have the permission to select. So I'm doing select star from system.person_occupation. And you can see that I'm still able to select, but I'm not able to insert using this user ID because this permission was taken away. So that is what data control language is. And to quickly summarize, data control language contains the create user query. It contains the grant query, where you can grant different permissions to the user. It contains also the revoke query. Using the revoke query, you can take away the permission from the user. And finally, it contains the drop user query. So the drop user query would remove the user from the system. And that's it for this video. See you in the next video. Thank you.